affect very much. You know, I don't mean American or European tourists. We have a lot of Malaysian, Indonesian, the Persian Gulf tourists, in the Central Asia, in Turkey, all these areas. We have bad climate. Well, Iran has got a fantastic climate, as we all know. Fantastic places to visit. And the tourists put $3,000 in their pocket and come. How can the sanction affect it? So we need to increase the capacity and become more welcoming for tourism, for example. By doing this kind of, you compensate for the effect of the sanction. And the beauty of this expansion of tourism for this, what we call Central Asia type tourists, not American or European. Actually, I'm against Iran going for American European, not because of the Western thing, because volatility is very high. If you rely like Turkey or Egypt, when you rely on a lot of Western tourists, a tourist activity can be very effective. But if you rely on non-Western tourists, that's not going to be that important. It's more a stabilizer. And it also allows the tourist income to feed into the lower level of echelon of the society, rather than always high level, because it's very labor intensive. Tourists to restaurants, you know, helping people to see the site. So basically, people are being here, so regional corporations, and so on. And also, you need to reform the price and the subsidy. I'm going to talk about that more if we have time. So then, how do you deal with volatility of oil exports? Well, the answer is actually you develop techniques which basically reduce the effect of volatility on Iran. And you reduce the effect on the domestic economy. In other words, what you do, you create a fund which during the, these are the data, I don't have time for, which shows how volatility affects negatively Iranian economy. But then you create oil stabilization fund. During Mr. Khatami, toward the second period, they did develop oil stabilization fund. What does oil stabilization fund do? Basically, you know that its price of something is vibrant. Imagine you yourself have an income which vibrates like that. What you have to do, you have to put the money in a fund and withdraw a stream of steady income. So what you do the same. The sovereign wealth funds are all over the world. Now, Norway has done the same. You know, there are 4 million people, but they have a huge wealth fund, which accumulated because they knew they couldn't use the oil really. So oil stabilization fund was the key, but one of the things Mr. Ahmadinejad did to abolish the oil stabilization. I come to you why he did it. A lot of things, people, they say it's madness. It's not. It actually was to do with the populist agenda. I'll come back to that. Explain that. But it's very important to recognize that Iran does need an oil stabilization fund, does need institutions which shock absorber, does need to expand sectors of industry and economy which is less subject to foreign intervention, like tourism, like small-scale businesses, expanding the. You know, it's all answered. We could have been doing it the last 50 years, the last 20 years, the last 10 years. As the sanction is expanding, you need to do that, rather than for big projects. So, the other one is managing inflation expectation. I did explain to you that in order to bring the inflation down, you need to reduce the inflation expectation. Why that's the case is because, as I already explained, that if you bring down the inflation expectation, that automatically reduces the heat in the economy. Because if you don't rush to buy the goods. Especially if you bring the inflation expectation in line with the interest rate. So in other words, what you do, mathematically, you can actually prove it, that you basically bring the inflation expectation down and bring the interest rate in line with it. As inflation expectation and reality goes down, you bring the interest rate down gradually, gradually, gradually. So your inflation goes down to 5%, and almost the same time interest rate goes to 5%. So now that inflation is expected about 20%, interest rate has to be 20%. Actually, the central bank listened to that, raised it. Now, the role of the central bank is now to operate on inflation expectation and bring the interest rate down as it goes inflation down. So the difference between the two becomes slightly positive. Okay. So that's how you do it. So that's one of the, and then obviously you need institutional reform. You need fiscal transparency. You need stability at the banking reforms. You need all of those. I'm not denying that, but I think we know how to actually operate so that this turn around gradually. Obviously, if there's a political upheaval, all of them has to be readjusted. If you have for whatever reason, you can't never be immune to shocks. No country is. You need to adjust. So that's what the interest rate would. It's called Fisher interest pattern. I've already explained too much about the theory. This is another of our parities, which is the key, which says that interest rate and inflation expectation have to be aligned with each other. You can't have an economy. Like in this country is the wrong eye at the moment. Inflation is running about 3%, interest rate is almost 0. And that's going to be a problem in the long run. You'll see. So interest has to rise quite quickly. Or inflation has to come down. So this is the problem. So let me a little bit now about because the time is running out, the agenda of Mr. Ahmadinejad and how it fits in with the energy price reform he enacted, why it was not successful, and why is it that some of the problem we are having is because of the populist agenda. Let me take you back to the first month that Mr. Ahmadinejad became president, not the second round, the first round. The first round, what he did, he basically, it wasn't a surprise to me that he praised the shovels in Venezuela. It's very similar agenda. So what he did, he basically thought he is, I don't know, a religious figure in his mind, like Hazrat Ali, that you go to the people and ask them what do they want. Of course, if you live in a village with about 1,000 people, maybe it's okay. But in a country about 75 million or 70 million at the time, now it's 77, you go to the Isfahan, and you bring thousands of people around, you say, excuse me, what do you want? So what do you think people tell? They have a list. Iran is an undeveloped economy. The average per capita income in dollars is about $4,000 or $5,000. Right? It's gone down because of the recent problems. It's gone down to $3,700. During the time he was doing it, it was about $4,000, $4,500. Now at that level of income, there's pent-up demands for all sorts of facilities. So if you ask people what they want roads, they want schools, they want better facilities, they want pension, they want health service, they want hundreds of things they want. Either as the person that you're asking, you are a sincere person, or you want to trick me. I wish he was not sincere. I said, one of the problems I had with when Mr. Amjikan, when I predicted this, I said he seemed to be very sincere, and I worried me. Because if somebody very sincere and go ask everybody what you want to do, they have to deliver. Now, you ask the list, then you suddenly realize there's hundreds of lists. We go across different towns. I'm not making it up. Go and read the literature, go and read the newspapers. How many places he visited? And ask this question. Thousands of people wrote in. They had to set up a directorate in Tehran to answer those requests and try to deal with them. Now, the first thing he realized that there are not funds allocated for this kind of purpose, because most of the budget in Iran, despite the fact most people think that there is no law in Iran, it has to be passed in a parliament. There is a government budget, there's already decided what road to build, what schools to build already. Now it's in addition to what you have. So what he does, the first thing he realized that he had to raid the oil stabilization fund. If you read all of the discussion in Iran, Parliament was upset. You may not remember it, but they're all there. So he had to do it because he had to get the money to be able to deal with some of these demands. So the populist agenda and being sincere led to dismantling, one by one, institutions which are built to develop the Iranian economy and prevent the shocks affecting Iran. The second thing, he abolished the plan organization. One of the role of plan organization was in Iran, not that it was central planning, that actually tried to control the vested interest demand, which was all there in the government, in order to stop it from actually used in terms of consumption and direct the oil income towards investment. That was originally the purpose. He also demanded, basically dismantled the whole of the machinery of the plan organization. He embodied all of the power in the Prime Minister's office. And then he created the National Development Plan. He put himself the head of National Development Plan. His ministers, the member of National Development Plan, basically controlled the National Development Plan. Part of that money, which was from the oil tax fund, went to National Development Plan. Then he enacted the reform. Everybody convinced him that the energy reform is important. Every economist agreed that energy reform is important. No government were there to do it. And everybody praised Mr. Ahmadinejad that how come he's got balls, he actually is doing something nobody did. Remember, during the Shah, they wanted to raise the oil price. Razmora was assassinated in front of Sepah Sarawat. Now, if you look at later look at the data, that the way he reformed it, it was a classic populist method. He said, okay, guys, those of you who are going to suffer from the higher energy, I'll give you a handout. But then he gave handout to everybody, even those who didn't need it. What is populist more than that? With no calculation that this is going to feed back into the economy and create demand for goods which are not there. Okay? So therefore, we end up paying $34 billion handouts. Iranian oil income before the sanction was 100 billion. You give $34 billion handout to everybody. So what do you expect? None of this unpredicted, right? It's everything I'm telling you was known at the time. So the result is we gave $34 billion and it's still being given. But then, did the reform work? No. The price of energy went up. Initially, it went up. So we look at the data. This is the data. The 100 is relative to US, the energy price. So therefore, countries that energy prices are high, like for example Norway, is this one. You know, a lot of Iranians say, oh, we have oil. Why do we have to pay so much? Norway paid more, Norwegians paid for their oil far more than the US. International prices. What is Iran? Iran is here. So it's very low, relatively. So I gave you relative. So therefore, this is the free gasoline. This is the official rate of gasoline. Now what happened when they increased the energy price up relative to international energy prices? But notice where we are now. We are back to where we were before. So we pay $34 billion a year. We have no effect whatsoever. Relative price of energy today in Iran is as bad as it was before Ahmadinejad reformed the energy price. Why it went wrong? Because when you reform the energy price, you have to make the level of energy in line with the foreign inflation. If the inflation rises, you have to bring the price of energy. What they did, while the inflation was accelerating, as I explained to you, went to 45% per annum. And the reason why partly that inflation was accelerating because it was the $34 billion which was distributed to the people without any productive capacity to compensate for the liquidity which was created. Despite the fact that inflation rising, they said it's no inflationary effect. So what they did, they fixed the price of energy inside Iran in real, while every other commodity started to rise. Therefore, it was clear, sooner or later, relative price of energy in Iran would be what it was before. And it was quite sooner than later. And after 4 years, we are where we were before. So no effect. The reform of energy has to be done again. Hopefully this time around they do it better. I've written a few things with Dr. Salih Esfani, which we wrote something about how it needs to be done. But I'm not going to go over the detail of it. I'm going to stop and then also point out to you that other policy populist agenda was Maskar-e Mehr, which was a huge project, not only in Tehran, across Iran. Most of it is unfinished yet. And the government, the present government has decided going to reduce the funding for this project by about 30%. They just can't manage it. You know, the government central bank was telling me that we have to pay the whole of the budget of the government to build this Maskar-e Mehr project.